Welcome to the Clifton Worley Show. This week we have Josh Fraser, and we also have a guest, Josh Pound. And we want to talk to him a little bit about his new podcast, After the Music Stops. And we're just going to do a little bit of storytelling and let him share his musical journey with you guys. So, Josh, before we dive into this, I kind of am a little curious about how your podcast kind of evolved in the idea for it. And if you want to go ahead and we'll kind of start with that.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me on. So the podcast, like you said, is After the Music Stops, and its whole intent is to bring worship leaders together in community, in unity, in friendship, kind of outside Sunday, if you will. Tandy and Connor and I have met over the years, basically through different groups on Facebook. The Worship Leaders Plus group, I believe, is where I met Tandy. Connor and I go back through, I think, the beginning of Gear Talk years ago. And last summer, we decided to meet up in person in Nashville. We went and met in October and spent a few days getting to know each other, hanging out. And really, it started from that. Really just enjoyed hanging out with them, getting to know them, not really talking shop necessarily, just doing life together for a couple of days. And that's where the idea came from. So, I approached both of them and said, hey, I've got this idea for a podcast. What do you think? They were on board. And a few months later, lots of planning goes into a podcast with, what are we going to talk about? How are we going to do the show? Things like that. But basically, we just want to record ourselves having conversation. As the show grows, we may bring some guests on from time to time. Haven't really looked too much into that at this point. That's kind of where we're at with it. We've got 2 episodes live right now. We're recording every week, so we will post weekly episodes and started the Facebook group to go along with that. Hopefully the listeners enjoy what they're listening to, and if they've got something to say, we want to hear it and discuss it with them.
Awesome. Well, I was listening to that today, and I really like you guys' approach because it's very it's very conversational in a sense. Like I almost want to call it like it's like worship leaders after hours or something. It's like after exactly like the title, After the Music Stops, and you kind of talk about life a lot. And
Yep.
On the second episode, it kind of made a full circle. It just talked about a lot of things you guys were interested in, and then it made the shift, circled back to worship. And so I thought that was really cool, and I really dig it, and I can't wait to see where you guys go with it. But we also, I want to circle back to you and kind of tell your story. I kind of tell like, we've been in a lot of the same groups for a while. You mentioned Gear Talk, Praise and Worship, and been in that for a long time, and then the Worship Leaders Plus as well. And I've seen you guys go back and forth and been a lot part of some of the discussions, and so I was excited when I saw that you were doing this podcast that was kind of worship leader related. But one of the things about worship leaders is it's kind of it's such a unique culture, but at the same time, like, we're very much like everybody else, and so we like to hang out, we like to talk, we like to kind of air out whatever's going on in our lives. And so that some of these groups are very therapeutic, like the Worship Leaders Plus, and it's just a way to kind of hash out ideas and talk shop, so to speak. But I would like to circle back and kind of you tell us about your journey, what led to getting into worship and playing music, and kind of go from there.
Sure. I guess we'll go all the way back. Ever since I can remember as a little kid, I'd always wanted to play guitar. In my probably 4 to 6 years of life, I wanted to be a rock star. I don't know where that came from. So grew up really loving music. My parents were always playing U2, Boston, Journey, anybody from that era. They had the music on, they had it loud, and I grew up loving it. I still love it. I still listen to it. Got my first guitar when I was 8 and did nothing with it until I was 11. Let's see. So when I was 11, my dad was a worship leader at our church. He would lead the men's groups, I believe, on Thursday nights, just a couple hundred guys. It was him and a guitar, and really set the example for me there. So he taught me a few chords. And so one day at church, I believe it was the worship leader in junior high youth group. They just put the word out, hey, who plays guitar, who sings, whatever. And like an idiot, I spoke up and volunteered myself. So basically, since junior high, I've been involved in worship and leading worship, playing guitar. Again, just I knew a few chords, had to learn a lot on the fly as I went. Things weren't always as structured as we like them to be, so learning songs as we go and not always having sheet music was pretty much normal, and which is good. You know, there's a lot to learn from that. Being ready in season and out of season, like the Bible says, even. So got involved with worship leading in junior high. My dad also ran sound, so I started helping him. We had a Saturday night service. We had bands come out for that. Big Tent Revival was one of them. They were around back then, but not anymore, I don't think. So they came around a lot on Saturday nights and just started basically running cables. My dad would say, go plug this into channel 1 or channel 8 or whatever it was. You know, learning the difference between a male and a female end on a cable was interesting because we hadn't had the talk yet. And so that came quickly afterwards. Plugging in microphones, learning how to sound check line levels, gain settings, things like that, very little by little over the next couple of years. So I was able to take that into youth group and help with that. And then moving into high school, started playing electric guitar, joined the worship team in high school, playing electric guitar. On Sunday mornings, we had youth group. On Thursday nights, I would run sound. We had an adult worship team for youth group. So basically just helping them as best I could. They were all experienced musicians who knew a lot more than I did. And again, I was just willing to learn, willing to help where needed. In high school, we moved, met my wife. She was my girlfriend in high school. Got involved in youth group there. Again, leading worship, running sound, kind of the same thing. Excuse me. After high school, got asked to stay on as a youth leader in the youth group there. Was still leading worship, running sound. Got moved to junior high for a while. They had separate junior high and high school youth groups at that church. And that was really a lesson learned there. Up until that point, I had never had to sing or lead a service without a PA system or a microphone. And so learning to project, learning to use my diaphragm, learning to really lead people instead of just going through the motions and playing songs was really helpful at that point.
Yeah. That's I think an awesome way to learn. And I want to circle back to, you talked about Big Tent Revival coming. That was like, for me, that was the first band that I ever had like their CD to, back in like the 90s. And I loved that group. I thought they were amazing back then. And I did get to catch them live, I think a few years before they broke up. And yeah, they had some great songs, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. Last I heard, I don't remember anybody's names in the bands, but the lead singer was leading worship in Southern California, I believe, at I don't even know the name of the church.
Yeah.
Anyway, a lot of these guys go from playing in bands to being worship leaders, and I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it seems to be kind of you can kind of hang out at home and get still to do something that you're passionate and you love about, but you're not traveling and on the road all the time.
Yep.
So where does it go from? So you were leading a youth group, and I'm assuming did you start working with the kids there, playing, developing a team there?
Yeah, we did. We had a couple guys that were really solid musically. They were involved in the pep band at school, so they played guitar, they played drums, they played horns, whatever needed. So we did form a band, just put a 3 or 4 piece band together, simple guitar, bass, drums, and a couple vocals, and did that for quite a long time before, people move and people get moved around in ministry and things like that. After that, I did get moved to the junior high youth group, like I said. Was able to train my replacement there, which was good because a year or so later, transitioned to the main service on Wednesdays and was alternating Wednesdays with the worship pastor, which was really a stretch to be able to go in and lead a full team of experienced musicians with basically zero knowledge of how to do it ahead of time. It was just very, it was stressful at times. A lot of times the worship pastor would say, you're doing great, just keep going. And I knew that there were times I wasn't doing great, but you just have to do it. That drive to wanting to get better, continuous improvement, wanting to build relationship with the team musically outside of church and things like that. You just keep working with them. And so we did that for a few years. I was playing electric guitar on the Sunday morning team by then. Did that for about 5 or 6 years. And then we got a request to move from Southern California to Southern Idaho, which is where we are now, to be a worship leader for a new church that church was starting.
Like, I'm sure there's a big culture shock.
It was. So I was born and raised in Southern California, very large cities, large population, millions of people within 10 or 15 miles of you. Just before, or the church we were at before we moved to Idaho was a smaller town, about 40 to 50,000 people in the entire community. The church of maybe 12 to 1,500. We moved in the summer of 2012. We got the request to come up, and the community we live in now, it's farms, lots of small churches, no people. I mean, there's maybe 30,000 people within 15 miles of this place. There's just nobody here. It's completely different, but we love it. We built our family here. I mean, we got pregnant with our first kid maybe a month after moving here, which was scary.
So basically, you've been leading worship since you were a preteen then, almost, right? 12, 13 years old?
Yes.
Wow, that's intense. I had a season in my life when I was doing the very similar thing where we didn't have a PA system for the youth group, and so I was from not singing at all, having to project, but this is in my 20s, so and I did that for almost 10 years, and it's really interesting to see a youth group band grow from nothing. But have you repeated that experience elsewhere, or is that just did you just move up through the ranks and in the next church become immediately a worship leader for the big church, or how did that work for you?
So the church we were at, where I was leading the youth group, I was there for about 10, well, was it 10 years? Maybe 8 years, from high school into, which would have been about 2012, would have been about 24. So 7 or 8 years. It did move up in the ranks there, really just being available, serving under the worship pastor there, still leading regularly backing up for him. And then when we got the call, so actually, here's a funny story. We got the call to move to Idaho. So I was leading worship. The worship pastor was out of town on a Sunday morning. And basically what happens when he was gone is he would ask me to fill in, or somebody else if they were coming through town. And the band stayed the same. So it was a full band, drums, bass, couple guitars. We had a trumpet player, 6 backing vocals, keyboards. We had it all, and it was fun. So the church services were 500 to 800 people, depending on attendance that day. And the pastor that was starting this church in Idaho came up to make the announcement that he was leaving. He had been gone for a few years in the Philippines as a missionary, and he and his wife had run an orphanage there. So when they got back, they felt the call to be a senior pastor. They were looking for an area, a church. And so Idaho came up, and there's, some decisions that were made there. Pastor came up to make announcements on that Sunday morning, announced that he was needing a worship leader. And he paused and he looked across the stage at me, and he just said, "Josh," with a big smile on his face. And the church started laughing. And I was like, I can't react to this right now. I'm on stage. I got my guitar on, there's no processing time. So I laughed also. And 6 weeks later, we were packing up a U-Haul.
That's crazy. Yeah. Now going back even further there, you said something about just being thrust into worship leading a preset band as the young new guy, right? And
yes.
How did that affect your leadership later on, do you think? That's always something interesting to me, because a lot of worship leaders come in after being in the band for quite a while, or they have they're a pastor's kid or something like that, so they're kind of already in the position, but you were kind of thrust into that position. How was that the first time, and how did it affect your leadership afterwards?
Well, it's interesting because I had been serving under other worship leaders for quite a while, to the point where I was already in the habit of, when they ask me of something, play a chord this way, change this song, I just do it, because I knew that that's what they were feeling led to do for the service. And so I think I came in with an expectation that would happen automatically. And I learned quickly that people are people. And I had to, it's weird to say this, I had to learn to be a leader, even though I was already in the position, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So I viewed the position of worship leader, and at our church, everybody led with a guitar. There were no worship leaders that played piano necessarily. That's just how things fell. And so I knew that the guy with the guitar up there was calling the shots, and I think I just expected to step into that role with that authority, but not realizing I had no leadership to do it. Like I still had that mentality of, we're all going to do this. We're all going to execute our parts and execute the songs as best we can, because that's what we do. And we're going to do it because I'm asking you to. And it was so not that. And that took, I'm still learning, but that took a while to really grasp. Teaching others to be able to be led even. And it's different because these are all adults, and I was, 20, and so really it was learning to lead people my parents' age. And that was a very different aspect. I had not done that before.
Yeah. Yeah. There's such a difference when you're leading a group of kids that you've taught how to play and taught how to play together, versus leading a group of adults who you've played with, and you've kind of learned to play with them together, even if you played with them for a long time. I know I still haven't learned to lead. I'm not a leader in that way. I'm not called to lead adults. I don't think I'm called to teach kids. And I would rather just play electric in the band for Sunday morning. But what would you say is that one thing, the biggest thing that you learned about leading versus playing, being a worship leader rather than a worship musician?
Well, everything about leading is being a servant. You have to serve your people. In music, you have to serve the song. You have to know your team. Relationally, they were all twice my age. Some of them were a little younger than that. So we weren't necessarily hanging out every Friday or Saturday night. You know, I had my own friends that weren't on the worship team, but really it's learning to serve.
That's good. Yeah, I can resonate that, Josh. That's a lot of the part of parallels in my journey as a worship leader. You know, I started doing this in my mid-20s, and most of my team were like my parents' age, you know, 50s, maybe even 60s. I think I had a guy in his early 70s playing piano. And I felt very much intimidated by trying to lead people who normally would be in authority over me, you know, because of age. And it took a while. It took a learning curve. I still don't think I'm perfect at it, but I think what you said, Josh, about relationally learning what works for your team, what works for your church, learning the culture, and what serves the church. For instance, like, I'd want to come in, and at the time it was like Desperation Band was big, and I'd want to do all Desperation Band songs or something. And learning, you can't just do that and connect with your congregation if they're, you know, a wider range of ages. So you kind of had to have something for everybody, right? At the same time, like advocating for growth and taking them somewhere, leading them somewhere. And so it takes time and some commitment to do that.
Yeah, I agree. You said leading them somewhere and taking them somewhere. A good leader knows where we're going and how we're getting there. And we don't always know. And that's scary to me. I'm a very structured person. I like to know where we're going and how to get places if we're driving somewhere. And if I don't go until I do. And leading a team, you have to know your vision. And you have to be able to cast that vision in a way that everybody understands and hopefully gets on board with. Short of being a dictator, you still have to steer the ship. And it's a very small rudder. You can't go in and make changes overnight. We moved to Idaho. The Sunday before we left, I led worship for the last time. That was just a request I put into my worship pastor. I said, "Hey, would you mind if I led one more Sunday just for fun?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely." This guy was a phenomenal guitar player. He went to Musicians Institute. He could shred up and down for days and never play the same riff twice. I mean, it was just incredible. So when I led, he played electric guitar for the team that I was leading, and it was fun. Our first Sunday in Idaho, we met in my pastor's living room, and there were 7 of us. So we went from a congregation of 800 to the 3 couples that were starting the church, and I think there was a visitor in a week. Wow. And so we really started from zero. I mean, we got a building within a couple months. We just rented a storefront, but we didn't have projection for lyrics. We didn't have a sound system. We didn't have anything, man. We bought some used chairs and we just started. So they're going back to my experience of having to learn to lead without a PA system applied immediately. You know, running sound applied immediately when it came time to put in a PA system. Leading a team of people older than me, well, that was basically the team we acquired over time. The first couple of months, actually first year, I was printing lyrics every week on paper. And we had these books that we would hand out basically like a hymnal, except it was with whatever songs we were doing that week. And we'd print 10 or 15 of them and people would share, and that's what we did.
Wow.
And then
that's kind of, it sounds a little freeing in some ways. to kind of do something along those lines, because I imagine quite the shift between a very polished, produced, all cylinders firing, and then trying to come up with something from the ground up. And there's a lot of worship leaders and pastors and stuff who look at church plants, and I think are attracted to that, but it also comes with a huge cost and a lot of sacrifice, and it's not just for anybody. It's like it takes the person who's willing to stick it out and stay with it.
I would agree. You learn a lot about each other and yourself when everything is stripped away and you have nothing. And I mean that by what you said, Clifton, is we had, Sunday mornings became very polished for us. We had some level of production. We didn't do fancy lights or smoke machines or anything like that. But you get used to good sound with a good sound guy. You get used to, multiple screens for lyrics and motion backgrounds and whatever else. And when all of it's gone, you just kind of sit back and go, okay, now it's like feet to the fire almost, of you really find out why you're doing it, because at that point it cannot be for show.
Yeah. Because
if it was, that's not the place to be showing off, with 6 people in a living room.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, one interesting thing about that is you learn very quickly what a good song is and what a good song isn't when you're singing it for 7 people or you're singing it for 10 people without a PA system. There's a lot of songs that sound awesome with full band and that really work, and they're not bad songs. But if you have 7 people in your house and you're singing them a song, you can really tell quickly how much fluff is in a song, right?
You can.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think was the most powerful song for you guys at that time when you were just starting out?
When we first started out, my pastor and his wife had been out of the country for 7 years, and the other couple that lived up here that requested the church had just moved back from Europe, and they were there for, I think, somewhere between 3 and 5 years. So they literally knew no new songs during that time frame.
Oh, okay.
So any song that I did, the first couple weeks, nobody sang except me and my wife. So, and we were doing songs. So this was 2012. So we were doing songs like Everlasting God, The Stand, Mighty to Save, songs in that realm. Yes, absolutely. And for me, because we had been playing them, for several years in the church, songs like Hosanna and the other Hosanna and the other, there's like 14 Hosannas. But for me, I was so used to playing them, it was easy for me to just kind of pull them out of my back pocket and go with them, because I knew that there was no expectation of having to have that new song within, X amount of days that it was released. And there was no guitar parts to learn because I was playing acoustic guitar and there was nobody else in the band yet. And there were no vocal harmonies because, I was singing alone. And so it was very, very easy to just strip everything down, be very basic, A, B, C parts for songs. We repeat them a couple times. There's no need to play a 6 or 7 minute song because, there's 6 of us in the room.
Yeah. Not a lot of places to go with that. Yeah.
Right. And the first Sunday, it was probably the most awkward I've ever had leading worship because, like I said, nobody knew the song. So it felt like I was playing for them. It felt like I had written songs that nobody knew and I was playing for them. And at the end, it was like, well, that was cool. It's like, well, I guess. But, over time with printing the lyrics and things, basically what I did is we had 140-ish songs in rotation in California. And I took that down to about 25 when we moved.
I was going to say that sounds about right. Yeah, 20 is perfect for a small group, because anything more than that, and the non-singers are just their eyes are going to glaze over and,
right.
they're going to have to look at the sheet the entire time. And yeah, for sure.
Yep. So we did maybe 3 songs, maybe it was probably 2 the first couple weeks. And over time, we got into a routine of we liked 3 or 4 or whatever the number was. And eventually we came to a comfortable place when the church was familiar with songs. We had a 35 to 40 in rotation at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, was that frustrating or liberating to be, I mean, at first it sounds like it was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. But like after you got into the flow and you really got to dig into those songs with a small group of people, and you really got to dig into what is really, the heart of worship with that small group of people. Do you think that was both frustrating and liberating, or more liberating at the end as it was growing?
Definitely both. We got into a building, and by then we had 15 or 20 people, and within, I don't know, 6 or 8 months, we had maybe 40 to 50 people. And we still didn't have a sound system. I think we put a TV up for lyric projection. We were in a small enough room. We got basically a 50-inch, LCD or LED or whatever it was back then. So we had a laptop running lyrics. And what was cool, frustrating at the beginning, when people want to worship, they worship. And it was cool to see that happen because people would start singing and we'd be like in an instrumental or an interlude in the song. So I wasn't singing and people would just take it to the bridge, or they'd go back to the chorus and just start. And because a few of them did it, everybody followed because the guys in the back couldn't hear me. And so I ended up following them, which was fun at the end, after I got used to it. But it was cool.
Yeah. It sounds like you're kind of like me. You like the rigid structure of with some improvisation in there, but mostly rigid structure. But that's an amazing experience to have the congregation lead the leader. That's something that does not happen, and at least not in my denomination, but not in a lot of places, not in a lot of churches.
Yeah, it's very not common, like you said, and I was used to that rigid structure. We used Planning Center in California basically for scheduling only, but we could have used Planning Center Live and been on time with it every week. It was that structured. We did songs a very certain way in no matter what service, Sundays, Wednesdays, Sunday nights, youth group. We all did it the same way, so everybody was able to learn the song the same, which there's some good and some bad to that, I think, but I was very used to that. This is how we do this song. We do the intro twice. There is an interlude. If there's no electric guitar, we take the solo out. That was basically it. We pretty much matched the recording. So when we came to Idaho and things got switched around, it was like, well, wait, that part doesn't go there. That was my mentality. And then, over time I had to learn, well, we can put this part wherever we want. And so it was very freeing. It was stretching me to be more flexible, and over time it just got better.
Yeah. Well, something that you said, it made me start thinking, once you start learning your community where you're at and you start relationing, getting involved with these people, and there's a culture being built, you start putting down a little roots. Like you said, you started having children. Here you are in this place, and you're invested at that point, whether you want to or not. You're invested in that situation, and I believe that once you start bearing fruit from that, is when it's like it's kind of like God showing you, look, I put you here for a reason. This is why,
Yeah, I do. One of those first confirmations was my wife getting pregnant. We had 2 miscarriages at that point in California, and there was no explanation from the doctors why. And we always joke that up here there's something in the water or something not in the water. But that was just that was confirmation of where we are supposed to be. We have 2 kids now, 2 beautiful daughters. They're 2 and 5, and we can't imagine having to raise 2 kids where we were at. It wouldn't have worked for us. Mostly thanks to the state of California. But it was hard. We left everything. We packed our whole house in a U-Haul. Our parents, both of them, stayed behind. My parents came later after the grandkids started coming. So they're with us now. But yeah, like you said, getting to know your church, getting to know the people. We would have known within the first 6 months if it wasn't for us. And within the first 6 months, we were in the process of buying a house and settling down, which was comforting.
Yeah. So let's fast forward. What's kind of going on now with you?
Well, there's a lot that's happened in the last almost 6 years that we've been here. We were at that church about 3.5 years. And really the last year of that church was just brutal. We got to a point of, I would say, unhealthy relationships with the leader board or the elder board, the pastor, senior pastor, and his wife. There was a breakdown in communication looking back now from the beginning. And I don't want to place any blame here. I believe that everybody's involved had, ways to do things better and ways that we all could have improved the situation. Just as much my fault as anybody's. We did have poor communication from the beginning, and it was something that I believe neither of us had that specific role before. I was not a worship leader for a church. I'd been worship leader for ministries, but not overseeing an entire church with, the tech team underneath that. My pastor likewise had not been a senior pastor before. So we were both learning as we went. And it just got to a point where we decided that our vision was not aligned and it was time to part ways.
Now, I'm kind of curious. That church is still in existence, right?
Yes, they are. Yep.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, because what's great is, what, people have disagreements, people make mistakes, and I think that the way that you handled that diplomatically in the way that you mentioned it is the way to handle a mistake. Sometimes you have a parting of ways because you can't repair in a way that's healthy the mistake, and I think that a lot of people point to that in the church and say, oh, well, look at that hypocrisy. Well, you know what? We're all flipping hypocrites,
Right.
We all make mistakes, and we all have people that eventually just rub us the wrong way. And that's part of life. And to be honest, I don't think we'd be human if it wasn't the case. And I think you see a lot of it, and kind of getting into our other topic a little bit, you kind of see a lot of that in worship culture. You seem to see these people thinking, oh, well, since we're in the church, we've got to be perfect. Since we're in the church, we can't say, hey, I really don't agree with this song, or I really don't agree with this worship leader, or I really don't agree with this pastor, because it looks like a sign of weakness. And when it's human interaction, that's how humans work. And if God wanted us not to work that way, he probably wouldn't have made us that way, to not be able to have that discussion. Right?
Yes, I agree. I agree with everything that you said. Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm kind of in a position where I can say whatever the heck I want. What are you doing now, Josh, besides the podcast?
So we moved up here. The other couple that started the church, the husband works for a potato processing company, and it was a very easy way to get a job for me when we moved. Basically, we both quit our jobs. We sold our house and we moved up here. We were jobless and homeless. And so we ended up house sitting for them for 2 weeks. He put in a word to his HR person, and they hired me, which was nice. And so I've been working at a potato processing factory for the last 6 years. Nothing like I had ever done before. Had a lot of learning to do there. I work in the warehouse now. I'm involved in inventory and management of the warehouse. We go to a church that's actually less than a quarter mile from our house. It's a local community church. It's been here for years, non-denominational. The pastor's amazing. I met the worship leader shortly after moving here. We've been friends for about 5.5 years now. So I play guitar on the worship team. I help with sound when they've got issues. Really, that's about it. Just enjoying life with my family. We have kids now, so I can't commit as much as I did a few years ago, and that's been okay. It's an adjustment because I'm so used to being at church or working on something for ministry, 5 days a week, basically, when I'm not working. And so that's been nice to be able to slow down for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's it's interesting, and it's interesting how we can go like from one season to another sometimes, and that's perfectly fine. Like there's this weight, I think, that a lot of worship leaders, or anybody who's involved in any capacity of leadership in a church,
Yes.
that if I don't do this the rest of my life, like I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. And like there's this,
I'm failing, right?
yeah. And I don't think that's the case at all. Like it's sometimes you're called for a season. And then God has something else in store for you for the next season, and that's fine. And it sounds very fulfilling, like what you're doing right now.
It is. And to touch on what you said about feeling that calling, I definitely felt that call when we moved here. And so the decision to part ways with that church did not come lightly. It took me about 9 months to accept it in my mind. And I'll be honest, not even that whole 9 months was I open and honest with my wife about it. And that was contributing to some of the issues that we had over the course of that year at the church. Really, it felt in my mind a battle with God, even, if you will, that I was called to be the worship leader at this church, and I felt that my work wasn't done. And the hardest part was being acceptable of the church and I parting ways, and would I be okay with that? And originally I wasn't. The question that kept coming to mind was, if you are not the worship leader at this church and this church is still, quote unquote, successful after you leave, are you okay with that? And my thought was, well, no, because what I think I'm supposed to be doing, I'm not done doing. We were building the worship team, we were building the tech team, and I was like, cool, let's do this and let's go. I'm in it for the long haul. And then it was like, well, what now? And part of the last couple of years has been having to accept that maybe that was a stepping stone for something else. That wasn't the landing stone.
Yeah,
That's good.
Yeah, that is good.
Yeah. Something interesting that comes out of that, I think, is that a lot of people, when they're doing something, especially when it's not their job, especially when it's for the church, when it's for a charitable organization or for something they believe in, they identify themselves to the point that they think that's what they are. And I definitely had a season of my life where I thought, okay, I'm the guitarist in my church band. I'm the guy that knows enough music theory to make sure that the keys are right. And I'm the guy that teaches the kids how to play, and then they end up in the band. And then we have enough people so that, hey, somebody can be off for a week. I'm the guy that does this and that. And that's me. And only in the past couple of years have I realized, you know what, that's not healthy. I am what God made me to be. I am me. I am not what I do, Right. And I think that so much of what we see out there right now is people being what they do instead of being who they are.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I think then you see a lot in like the caricatures of P-dubbers, a lot of that stuff I think is a result of people having a little bit of an identity problem, like their whole identity is wrapped up in I'm the guitar player, I'm the keyboard player, or whatever, I'm the worship leader.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not really, that's just an avenue for
Yeah.
accomplishing what we need to do. Like, that's not what life is about. I mean, life is about the if we're Christians, the body of Christ, but also like our communities we're planted in, you know. And are we in a healthy, life-giving community? Are we invested in our families? Are we invested in those around us? And our identity is not in being a band leader or being a worship leader, guitar player, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
and I think like a lot of times, anybody who's been doing this a while comes to that realization. But, you know, casting all the stereotypes aside, like, you see a lot of guys who are like brand new to this, and they are like the stereotypical P-dubber, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
So, well, that's been some very interesting conversation tonight, and I really appreciate you, Josh, for coming on the show. And if you would, just spend a minute telling us how our listeners can find your show and subscribe to it and your Facebook group and everything.
Yeah. Again, it's After the Music Stops podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Podbean. We're on Google. What do they call that? Google Play.
Mm-hmm.
The Facebook group is, well, it's facebook.com/groups/ After the Music Stops, I believe. But if you search in the search bar for After the Music Stops podcast, we've got a page that you can like and a Facebook group that you can join in the conversation. New episodes are posted every Monday morning.
Awesome. Well, likewise, if you just happen to, hear this podcast, if you follow Josh and you want to follow us, same thing. We're on all the podcast mediums, the Clifton Worley Show, and you can find us there. Also, the cliftonworleyshow.com, new website up, and would just love for you to check out our Facebook group, our community, and see if it's something you might want to be involved in, and have a lot of discussion going back and forth there. And so, yeah, appreciate it again, Josh, and can't wait to see where your podcast goes, and it's exciting stuff, man, and appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for having me. It was great to be here.